a machine can be born of compromise. It can enter the world carrying a hidden fatal flaw, a secret kept by its creators. On the outside, it is the pinnacle of modern efficiency, a sleek aluminum tube promising safe passage through the heavens. But inside, in the silent language of its code, a ghost waits. This ghost is not a spirit, but a system. A few lines of software written not just to fly, but to deceive, to make a new machine feel old, to make an unstable design feel familiar, and to save money. For 346 people, this ghost in the machine would become an executioner, a relentless, invisible force pushing them toward the earth, while the pilots who were sworn to protect them fought a battle they could not understand and were never meant to win. How does this happen? How does one of the world's most respected engineering firms, a name synonymous with American ingenuity and aviation safety, create an aircraft that actively fights its own crew? What is the calculus that weighs the cost of pilot training against the value of human life and chooses the former? And what becomes of the guardians, the regulators meant to stand watch when they delegate their authority to the very corporation they are tasked with policing? This is not a story of a single accident, but of a systemic disease, a narrative of a corporate culture that lost its way, an engineering marvel that became a tomb, and the devastating final price paid by unsuspecting passengers and their families. The story of the Boeing 737 MAX is an autopsy of a failure. It begins decades before the first bolt is turned, with a cultural shift that prized shareholder value above all else. It culminates in two horrific crashes, 5 months apart in the waters of the Java Sea and the fields of Ethiopia. The final tally is absolute and unforgiving: 346 souls extinguished. Their final moments were a testament to a series of decisions made years earlier in boardrooms and design meetings. Decisions that sealed their fate long before they ever boarded the plane. To understand how this happened, we must trace the pathology from its very inception. The story of the Boeing 737 is the story of modern commercial aviation. First flown in 1967, it became the workhorse of the skies, a reliable, versatile, and profitable aircraft that connected the globe. For decades, Boeing was a company run by engineers, a place where safety and innovation were the guiding principles. The corporate ethos was simple: build the best, safest plane and profit would follow. But in 1997, a seismic shift occurred. Boeing merged with its struggling rival McDonnell Douglas. It was less a merger and more an acquisition. But the corporate culture of the smaller, more financially aggressive McDonnell Douglas began to permeate the halls of the larger, engineering-focused Boeing. A new mantra took hold, imported from Wall Street: the relentless pursuit of shareholder value. The bottom line was no longer a consequence of good engineering. It was the primary objective. This new philosophy set the stage for the birth of the 737 MAX. The true location of the MAX's conception was not a drafting table, but a moment of market panic. In 2010, Boeing's European rival Airbus announced the A320neo, a version of its popular single-aisle jet featuring new, highly efficient engines. Airlines, desperate to cut fuel costs, flocked to the Neo in droves. Boeing was caught flat-footed. It had been considering a brand-new, clean-sheet design to replace the aging 737, but that would take a decade and cost billions. Airbus was stealing its market share now. The pressure from airline customers and shareholders was immense. A faster, cheaper solution was needed. The decision was made. Instead of designing a new airplane, Boeing would once again update the venerable 737. They would put new, larger engines on a 1960s airframe. This decision, born of financial expediency, was the program's original sin. The first signs of the coming disaster appeared on the engineers' computer screens. The new LEAP-1B engines were significantly larger and more fuel-efficient than their predecessors. To fit them under the 737's low-slung wings, they had to be mounted further forward and higher up. This seemingly minor adjustment had a major aerodynamic consequence. At high angles of attack, when the plane's nose is pointed sharply upward, the new engine nacelles could create lift, causing the nose to pitch up even further. This created a risk of an aerodynamic stall, a dangerous condition where the wings lose lift. The new MAX did not handle like the old 737s. It had a hidden tendency, a dangerous quirk baked into its very geometry. This was the fundamental problem that needed to be solved, or as it turned out, hidden. The solution could have been complex and expensive. It could have involved physical changes to the airframe or mandated extensive, costly simulator training for all pilots to familiarize them with the new handling characteristics. But the entire purpose of the MAX program was to be fast and cheap. Its key selling point to airlines was that it was just another 737. A pilot certified on an older model could step into a MAX cockpit with minimal computer-based training. This promise of commonality was the bedrock of the MAX's business case. The enabling condition for the tragedy was this financial imperative, coupled with a powerful tool of regulatory capture, the FAA's Organization Designation Authorization, or ODA. This program allowed Boeing to use its own employees to act on behalf of the FAA, certifying its own work. The watchdog was effectively on a Boeing leash, creating an environment where a dangerous compromise was not just possible, but likely. To solve the pitch-up problem without triggering the need for expensive pilot training, Boeing engineers devised a software fix. They created the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. It was designed to be a silent, automated background system. When the plane's angle of attack became too high, MCAS would automatically push the nose down, counteracting the effect of the new engines and making the MAX feel just like its predecessor. A pattern of deception began to emerge in its very architecture. To keep the system simple and its existence quiet, it was designed to take its readings from a single angle of attack sensor. This created a catastrophic vulnerability, a single point of failure. If that one sensor malfunctioned and sent a false high angle of attack reading to the flight computer, MCAS would activate erroneously, fighting the pilots for control of the plane. This machinery of evil was not built in a shadowy lab, but in the mundane world of corporate bureaucracy. During development, test pilots found that MCAS needed to be more powerful to be effective at low speeds. Its authority was increased fourfold, from moving the horizontal stabilizer by 0.6 degrees to 2.5 degrees per activation. It became a bulldog capable of overpowering a pilot pulling back on the control column. The most critical decision, however, was one of omission. Boeing successfully argued to the FAA that because MCAS was designed to operate only in extreme flight conditions outside the normal envelope, pilots did not need to know about it. The system's existence was scrubbed from the flight manuals. Pilots transitioning to the MAX were given a short course on an iPad, with no mention of the powerful hidden flight control system that could seize control of their aircraft. The logic was perverse but clear. If pilots didn't know about it, it couldn't trigger a new training requirement. The psychological landscape inside Boeing was one of intense pressure and compartmentalization. Managers, driven by budget and schedule, pushed engineers to deliver the plane on time. Some engineers raised concerns about MCAS's reliance on a single sensor, but these concerns were overruled. The culture had shifted so profoundly that the engineering chain of command was subservient to the financial chain of command. People rationalized their decisions. MCAS was a safety feature, they told themselves, designed to prevent a stall. The odds of a single AOA sensor failing were deemed remote. This was the banality of the process. Through a series of small, justifiable in isolation decisions, a system was created that put hundreds of lives at risk. The corporate mind dissociated, separating the shiny marketing of a safe, efficient plane from the dark reality of its flawed, hidden code. There were near discoveries, tragic forks in the road where the disaster could have been averted. During the certification process, Boeing identified that an AOA disagree light, a simple cockpit alert that would inform pilots if the plane's two AOA sensors were providing conflicting data, was a critical safety feature. Yet Boeing made it an optional, extra something airlines had to pay for. Most, including Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines, did not purchase it. Later it was discovered that a software error meant the light wouldn't have worked on most planes anyway unless a separate, more expensive package was also bought. In another instance, an FAA test pilot experienced MCAS activating unexpectedly in a simulator but categorized it as a nuisance rather than a catastrophic failure, and the issue was not pursued with sufficient rigor. Each of these moments was a muffled scream from the future, a warning that went unheeded, buried under paperwork and the relentless pressure to get the MAX to market. By 2017, the 737 MAX was in service. It was a triumph. Airlines loved its fuel savings. Passengers booked flights without a second thought. Boeing's stock soared. The program was at its peak of operations, a resounding success story of American industry responding to market competition. Hundreds of the jets crisscrossed the globe. Every day, their public facade one of perfect modern normalcy. The company's confidence was absolute. They had re-engined an old airframe, avoided costly training, and beaten Airbus at its own game. The compromise had worked. The ghost in the machine remained dormant, waiting for the precise combination of a faulty sensor and an unsuspecting crew. It did not have to wait long. On October 29, 2018, the invisible victims boarded Lion Air Flight 610 in Jakarta, Indonesia. There were 189 people on board, civil servants, a newlywed couple, a young doctor, and an Italian former professional cyclist. It was a routine one-hour flight to Pangkal Pinang. The aircraft, a brand new 737 MAX 8, had experienced flight control problems on its previous flight, but maintenance crews had cleared it to fly. Minutes after takeoff, the faulty left side AOA sensor sent an erroneous signal to the flight computer. MCAS awoke. It began relentlessly pushing the plane's nose down. The pilots, Bhavya Suneja, and his co-pilot Harvino were bewildered. They had no idea what MCAS was. They saw the plane pitching down and did what every pilot is trained to do. They pulled back on the control column. But they were fighting a system designed to ignore them. For 11 minutes, a terrifying tug-of-war ensued. The pilots would momentarily regain control, only for MCAS to reactivate and force the nose down again and again and again. Finally, the pilots lost the battle. The plane entered a terminal dive, plunging into the Java Sea at over 500 miles per hour. All 189 people were killed instantly. In the aftermath, society looked away, or rather, was directed to look away. Boeing and the FAA issued an emergency airworthiness directive, but it was a masterclass in blame shifting. It reminded pilots of a long-standing procedure for dealing with a runaway stabilizer, a known but rare malfunction. The directive failed to mention MCAS by name or explain that the plane's own software was the source of the problem. The narrative, carefully managed by Boeing and implicitly endorsed by the FAA, was that the Lion Air pilots had failed to react properly. It was a failure of training, of procedure, not of design. The global aviation community, long accustomed to trusting the FAA as the gold standard of regulation, largely accepted this explanation. The vast majority of the world's 737 MAX fleet continued to fly. The system of denial held. For 5 more months, the zenith of horror continued, with thousands of passengers flying daily on a plane with a known, uncorrected, and undisclosed fatal flaw. The first significant cracks in this wall of denial appeared on March 10, 2019. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, another brand-new 737 MAX 8, took off from Addis Ababa. On board were 157 people from 35 different countries, humanitarian workers, diplomats, environmentalists, families on vacation. The external pressure of a second identical disaster was about to shatter the carefully constructed narrative. Within minutes of takeoff, the same horror unfolded. A faulty AOA sensor triggered MCAS. The experienced pilots, Captain Yared Getachew and First Officer Ahmed Nur Mohammed, fought valiantly. They knew about the Lion Air crash and the recent directive. They followed the procedure, cutting power to the stabilizer trim system, but they could not manually retrim the aircraft to bring the nose up. In a final, desperate attempt to regain control, they restored power, hoping the electric trim would work. Instead, MCAS activated one last time, pushing the plane into its final fatal dive. It crashed into a field, leaving a crater 60 feet deep. All 157 souls were lost. The second crash made the pilot error explanation impossible to sustain. The pattern was undeniable. This time, the world did not wait for the FAA. China, the largest operator of the 737 MAX, grounded its entire fleet within hours. Other nations quickly followed suit. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, in a stunning rebuke to its American counterpart, also grounded the plane. The FAA and Boeing were isolated, their credibility collapsing under the weight of mounting external pressure. Internally, the carefully maintained silence at Boeing fractured. Whistleblowers began to contact journalists and congressional investigators. Leaks of internal emails and documents started to paint a damning picture of the MAX's development, revealing the internal debates about MCAS, the pressure to cut costs, and the conscious decision to withhold information from pilots. The definitive breakthrough came from the Earth of Ethiopia. The recovery of the flight data and cockpit voice recorders, the black boxes, provided irrefutable proof. The data showed the faulty AOA sensor, the repeated uncommanded activations of MCAS, and the pilots' desperate, futile struggle against their own aircraft. The voice recorder captured their confusion and their final terrifying moments. The evidence was absolute. The ghost in the machine had a name, and its name was MCAS. The truth, buried under layers of corporate speak, regulatory deference, and financial imperatives, was finally unearthed. The lie that had sustained the program had been exposed by the undeniable arithmetic of 346 deaths. The revelation was not a single police raid, but a global grounding. It was a worldwide vote of no confidence in both Boeing and its regulator. The sight of hundreds of brand-new billion-dollar aircraft sitting idle on tarmacs around the world was a powerful symbol of the collapse. The world's best-selling airplane had become a pariah. This public shaming was followed by an onslaught of investigative journalism and government hearings. The carefully constructed facade of corporate responsibility and regulatory oversight was stripped away, revealing the rot beneath. The accounting was a meticulous process of forensic discovery. Journalists at the Seattle Times, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal pieced together the damning timeline. They found the internal memos questioning the reliance on a single sensor. They uncovered instant messages between Boeing employees mocking the FAA's lax oversight and admitting they had essentially lied to regulators. They documented the high-pressure meetings where schedule and budget concerns overruled engineering safety principles. Congressional investigators hauled Boeing's CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, before televised hearings. His testimony, a mix of corporate jargon, deflection, and carefully worded apologies, failed to quell the public and political outrage. The forensic accounting was not just of technical failures, but of moral and ethical ones. The total victim count was fixed at 346, each name a testament to the failure. The trial was multifaceted. In the court of public opinion, Boeing was found guilty of a staggering betrayal of trust. Legally, the reckoning was more complex. Muhlenberg was fired, but with a multi-million-dollar exit package. The Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation. In January 2021, Boeing entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. The company admitted that 2 of its employees had deceived the FAA about MCAS. It agreed to pay over $2.5 billion in penalties and compensation, with a significant portion going to the families of the victims. But the agreement shielded the company itself from a criminal conviction and, crucially, no high-level executive faced personal criminal charges. For many of the victims' families, this was not justice. It was a cost of doing business, a financial penalty for a crime that should have been measured in prison sentences. The system that enabled the disaster was chastised, but its fundamental structure remained intact. The aftermath belonged to the survivors and families. The parents, spouses, and children of the 346 victims refused to let their loved ones be reduced to a statistic in a corporate settlement. They became a powerful global voice for aviation safety reform. They traveled to Washington to give emotional testimony before Congress, their personal stories of loss cutting through the sterile language of regulations and profit margins. They formed advocacy groups ensuring that the lessons of the MAX were not forgotten. They fought not just for financial compensation, but for accountability, for a world where the sacred trust between passenger and plane maker could never again be so catastrophically broken. Their grief became a form of powerful, enduring witness. The story is also one of cover-ups and failures that persisted even after the exposure. The deferred prosecution agreement was widely seen as a failure of the justice system to hold power to account. Critics argued it allowed Boeing senior leadership to escape responsibility for a corporate culture they had fostered. The FAA, despite promises of reform, continued to rely heavily on the ODA program, the very system of self-certification that had failed so spectacularly. The battle to truly overhaul the system of regulatory oversight, to restore the independence and authority of the regulator, remains ongoing, a testament to the immense political and economic power of corporations like Boeing. The cultural legacy of the 737 MAX is indelible. The name itself is now a permanent cautionary tale, a synonym for corporate hubris and the catastrophic consequences of prioritizing profit over people. It is a case study taught in business schools, engineering programs, and ethics courses worldwide. Documentaries and books have dissected the failure, bringing the complex story of systems, software, and corporate culture to a global audience. The MAX has become a mythic symbol of modern capitalism's dark side, a story of how even the most trusted institutions can fail when their moral compass is demagnetized by the pull of the stock market. In the end, what does this story reveal? It shows that the most dangerous flaws are not always in the metal but in the culture. It proves that safety cannot be delegated, and that a watchdog without teeth is merely a pet. The 346 people who died on Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian Airlines 302 were victims of more than a software glitch. They were victims of a system that rationalized risk, a regulator that abdicated its duty, and a corporate culture that forgot its primary purpose. The most important question remains for us today. Have we truly learned? As we board our next flight, are we willing to believe that the invisible contract of safety has been restored? Or was the 737 MAX a warning of a deeper, more persistent pathology in the systems that govern our world? We owe it to the dead to keep asking. We owe it to the living to demand an honest answer.